Okay, so our next session is from Pete Berthelsen. Many of you may recall Pete presented at our last working group meeting, unfortunately remotely, although I think he still gave a very excellent presentation. But we're lucky enough to have him here in person today. Pete works at Pheasants Forever. He is the Director of Habitat Partnerships, and so we'll be again speaking about the art and science of partnerships, and particularly partnering with landowners. And in his current role, he works with his staff to develop and expand partnerships that help deliver the Pheasants Forever's mission. As an organizational priority, they are pursuing opportunities that positively impact establishing high-quality habitat for pollinator species. Prior to being at Pheasants Forever, Pete worked with the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. He was at the Fish and Wildlife Service in North Dakota, the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department, and also the U.S. Forest Service in Michigan. So has broad experience within all of those organizations. So take it away, Pete.
All right, thank you, Iris. Like Iris said, last year I was here digitally, so happy to be here in person this year to chat about this. Iris asked me to talk a little bit about whether or not, what kind of opportunities are there to work with landowners to be involved working along right-of-ways and that sort of thing. And my answer to her was that there's a tremendous number of opportunities, and that'll be a little bit my job here today to kind of show you why I think there's so many opportunities. So since almost none of you really know who I am, I'll give you just a little short introduction to back up what Iris said. This is a photo of my lovely wife and I burning our native prairie that resides in Nebraska. We are landowners that live in the very central part of the state in the beautiful Luss Hills that is a rolling topography that's divided evenly between row crop production, corn and soybeans, and rangeland like this one. I'm an amateur beekeeper with a small apiary of 7 hives. But what I'm really, really passionate about in my career is this, getting high quality habitat onto the landscape. And I think that's kind of a little bit of the message of what's going to fit into the things that we're going to talk about right now. So yesterday in the lightning round, I threw the closing comment out there that if we try to solve some of these things, whether it's related to the population of monarch butterflies or honeybees or other forms of wildlife, if we try to solve them using the same techniques that we've been using for the last couple of decades, I don't think that we're going to fail. I don't think that we will succeed. So that's going to be a little bit of my message here today. Because if you look at an image like this, which I'm sure probably most of us have seen, comes out each winter, where it kind of shows what the population estimate is of the monarchs in Mexico, and you look at what the national goal is of where we're trying to get to, that 20-year average. You know, the last decade plus, those numbers don't look very good. And then when you add in the fact that this past year we had a 27% decline, I really believe strongly that there are so many factors that go into land use today that we have to look at how we design and manage land differently, because in many cases, from my perspective of a 35-year career in wildlife management, it really seems to me like wildlife is really left with the scraps that are left on the landscape in many cases. So we really need to be thinking about how we work on that. And I like to use this image in almost every presentation that I give because I think it provides a little bit of background of the perspective of the statement that I just made about the scraps. This is an image that shows over a 4-year period where roughly 24 million acres of ground that was primarily in grassland was converted to row crop production. And when you take a look at that map, and then you look at the map that shows where for monarch butterflies, if you want to make a difference, where we need to focus those efforts, if you take a look again and kind of overlay these two maps over each other, they're like mirror images. And these are the areas of our country where there are significant demands on the land and the resource. And as I like to say to my wife, when I encourage her that we need to buy more land, they're not making any more of it. So there's a lot of demands on those resources that are out there that we need to think about. But the other thing to think about when you look at that map is, I would venture to say every single person in the room today has the opportunity to impact what's happening in there. This is an incredibly valuable and important collection of people in this room today. And don't ever think that you don't have the ability to impact what's going to happen in there. So my viewpoint is that it all starts with habitat. And yesterday, one of the presenters talked about the quality of habitat. Not all habitat is equal. And so I believe that when we have those opportunities to make something happen on the landscape, it all starts with habitat, and we have to work on it. So here's a little bit of an addition that was added to my presentation this morning when Ryan informed us that he couldn't make it. And I think that it goes exactly to what Pam was talking about before I got up here. This is a couple of years old. I didn't update it this morning, but this shows the national corn price. And in my world, in central Nebraska, that red line is what it costs to grow corn. And when you see these numbers that are down in this area and below that red line, obviously that's a stress in the agricultural community. The margins are thinner in how you make a living, but it's also an opportunity for how we can get conservation onto the landscape. And I'm going to eventually loop all this back together and talk about how this connects the opportunities with right-of-ways. So when you take a look at that image and you look at it, let me back up and say that I don't know how many people follow agricultural predictions in this room, but the economic predictions are out there that corn and soybeans, which are king in that map for the Monarch area that we showed, those are the #1 crops that are in there. They're predicted to be in this area for pricing for the next decade. The next decade. So here's my neighbor. Doesn't know how famous he is, but I took a picture of my neighbor's crop field as I was driving by. Anybody know what this is right here? No? It's an irrigation pipe. Thank you. So this is an irrigated field. It doesn't lack for want of water or anything. But as you look at this field and as you come to the edge of the field, you can kind of see how the production drops off. Well, my neighbor also doesn't know that I wandered out through his field and I borrowed 1 ear of corn from each row. And when you take a look at the production from each of those rows, so look back at that field again, and then you look at what the production was, somewhere between here and here is an opportunity for conservation to increase my neighbor's farm and ranch income. Somewhere the input costs for what it costs to grow this corn is exactly the same as the input costs here. Same cost of the seed, the fertilizer, the diesel fuel, all of those things, but yet obviously these areas aren't profitable. And I'll talk about this a little bit more in a minute, but this is a significant opportunity because on virtually every farm and ranch in the country, there are areas that are not as profitable. So we can work with landowners to increase their income. And here's a real world example of a landowner that we worked with in Minnesota. This was actually in corn. And when you look at this, if you're unfamiliar with the color in there, this is the actual data from the combine. It's called yield monitor data. Green is beautiful, very profitable. Red, you're taking on water, you're leaking, the boat is leaking. So these areas in here that are red due to things like soil type, slope, other different factors that could be out there, these are the areas that aren't as profitable. These are the areas that are really, really good. And this is pretty common throughout agriculture. And what this landowner does is what every landowner does. You amortize the bad areas across the good areas, and you hope you come out making a profit. So here's what the actual profit centers were for that field. We took a look at just those red areas and strategically worked with the landowner to take just those areas and enroll them into a conservation program. In this example, it was the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Conservation Reserve Program. Could be the Bee and Butterfly Habitat Fund that I talked about yesterday. Could be a state program. Could be a unique incentive that comes from a partnership made up of people in this room. But when we take a look at what happened to that landowner's profit center on one 181-acre field, the average yield went up, the profit and the return on investment in this one field dramatically increased. We take out the areas that are not profitable, we put them into something that removes those costs and gives them an incentive in a conservation program, and it completely changes the profitability on this field. Now apply that to an entire farm and ranching operation. This is how we work with agriculture to meet our goals of getting conservation onto the landscape. So I've been on a little bit of a personal journey the last 6 years to talk to people about how I believe that pollinators are a glue that brings all kinds of people together with a common message. So here's my opportunity now to, Iris said, okay, Ryan, you talk about agriculture, and Pete, you talk about how you can kind of work with landowners that are not necessarily farmers. So as I thought about that, I thought about, okay, what are the limitations of working with landowners like that? If I was a right-of-way, if I was an entity working with rights-of-ways. And there's a couple of easy ones. If I'm dealing with somebody that, say, they have an acreage or something like that, and I'm trying to work with them, they probably don't have a lot of equipment to put habitat in. They don't have as much knowledge about how to design habitat, how to plant it, how to get it in the ground. They don't really have the ability to do habitat. Those are limitations, but they're not big limitations, because the opportunities to work with landowners in an environment like that is far greater. The first one is that yesterday I tried to make the case that we have a unique moment in time. We have a unique moment in time where just about anybody that you want to talk to in the public knows that there's something going on with monarch butterflies, with honeybees, with things like that. I have a lot of friends that are commercial beekeepers, and they tell me all the time that they can be at the grocery store at the checkout line, and if they're wearing some kind of clothing or something that lets people know that they're a beekeeper, just about everybody says, how are your bees doing? What's going on? There's a very high level of knowledge in the public about this stuff. So we have a unique moment in time. The public, the people that have joined your right-of-ways, I believe have a really strong interest to do something. They don't know what to do. They don't know how to do it, but they want to do something. They want to be part of something. This is a significant opportunity for the people in this room to go out and take that passion and enthusiasm that the public has. They don't know how to do it. They don't know what to do exactly, but they want to be part of it and point them in the right direction to find a way to let them feel like they're a part of what you're doing related to pollinators. If you can thread that needle of allowing adjoining landowners or even the greater public outside of that, thread the needle of, I understand we don't necessarily want people marching around on right-of-ways, helping to plant something or to manage it. We've already heard that. But find a way to make them feel that they're a part of this. There's a significant opportunity out there to build an army of people that are very supportive of what you're doing out on the land. Towards that end, when we do plant something, this was a little bit of last year's message that I talked about, but I think it's critical that when we get the opportunity to get something on the ground, we have to get the right something planted. If we're down to the scraps on the landscape, we have to make every bit and piece of habitat the greatest quality that it can be. Because this is the kind of image that everybody wants, but you only get that with some specific things. So Pheasants Forever and the Bee and Butterfly Habitat Fund have a habitat standard that we follow. And that habitat standard I talked about a little bit last year, so I'll just kind of breeze through it. But there are 5 things in our habitat standard that we talk about that we use to design all of our habitat mixtures. And it's really, really important what we plant for a number of reasons. I'm going to throw up just a couple of slides here that kind of try to bolster this argument about the quality of the habitat and that higher quality habitat has greater benefits. Here are the top 10 plants that had monarch butterfly associations with them in a study that was done by Creighton University over multiple decades. If you think about these different species in there, those are things that we should be thinking about when we're trying to design pollinator mixtures. This is a little bit of information that will be published soon from our partners at USGS. Here's what you want to take home from this. You don't have to know all of the different plant species and that sort of thing. The message of this slide is the more species in your mixture, the more things you benefit. The more things that you include in your seeding mixture, the more native bee species, in this example, you're going to benefit. Here's the other benefit. If you got lots and lots of species in there, and to me, lots and lots is probably 50, 60, 74 species in your seeding mixture, whether it's a hot year or a cold year, a wet year or a dry year. Just about no matter what kind of conditions you get, something in that mixture is going to perform well for you. It's yet another reason why you want to have lots of species in there. Same thing for bees. The take-home message on this, again, is the more species you have in your mixture, the more grassland bird species were benefited. Another real busy slide that you don't have to understand, but again, it shows that the more species you have in your mixture, this is native bee species in here that were being benefited. The more species in your seeding mixture, the more native bees that you're benefiting. So I'm going to kind of come around the corner here and try to close this up and leave you with my last message, and that is don't ever underestimate the power of pollinators. Pollinators are a glue that is a message that you can put out there to the public that they will be incredibly engaged in and want to be a part of. When you think about this moment in time, whether we're talking about monarch butterflies or honeybees, the national attention that it's getting in the media, in the public, the general basic understanding that the broad public has, this is an incredibly unique opportunity for right-of-way companies to engage the public in a really, really positive message and to get them to be your spokespeople. Think about having the public feeling like they're engaged and in some way supporting things for monarch butterflies and honeybees and having them be the spokespeople for your pollinator messages that are going on right-of-ways. That, to me, is the opportunity that's out there, and it's a powerful opportunity. Because pollinators are a new kind of glue. We know from research that the public is willing to pay to make sure that we have monarchs. We know that pollination in general is significantly important to our farm economy and the economy in general and what we eat in the country. Great messages that can be pulled together. So in a pollinator project, we have the opportunity to weave in that message about monarch butterflies and about honeybees and native bees, but it also goes beyond that to talking about all kinds of other critters, the grassland songbirds, pheasants, and quail. Water quality, I think, is one of the next messages that is almost as high a public profile as pollinators. It's coming, and this can be a message that's woven in there along with soil health. But the last message that I think that you really want to think about how to tie in to your pollinator efforts on right-of-ways is this thing called sustainability. So I live in central Nebraska, the very middle of the state. I get out of the state every now and then. They let me leave. And when I left, I went to a big national chain that we don't have in Nebraska. I'll leave their name out of it, but I walked through the store because I've always heard about this large grocery chain. And I walked through there and I just started taking pictures because we don't sell this kind of stuff at the grocery store in my town of 157 people. And that is the fact that there is a real keen interest in buying things that are labeled as organic and grass-fed and free range and non-GMO and anything else, any other label that you want to put on there. I believe that you have a significant opportunity to tie the message of what you're doing about pollinators to this incredible growing interest in sustainability. You know, when the public is very willing to pay significantly more for a food product that is organic and natural and all of those, and grass-fed and all of those kinds of things, this is a message that you can also weave in to your pollinator work as well. So I'm going to wrap this up with talking about, Pam told you about a little bit of trip that happened last spring where we went down to Mexico. I was a stowaway on the plane that went down there. I snuck on. They didn't know I was going. This is the whole group that was out there. Pam talked about it, about the leadership of agriculture and some NGOs and other groups that went out there. And I guess I just want to close by putting up a couple of pictures and talking about the experience that I think people know about. And I want to talk about the power of having third graders care about whether or not there's monarch butterflies around. And that's just some of the imagery from there. And then the other striking thing of being on the sanctuary, taking all of this in, hearing the monarch butterfly wings, seeing the colonies and all that, and then looking down on the ground and seeing the literally thousands of monarchs that expended the last ounce of energy that they had to get to the mountaintop and didn't get any further. It's pretty moving, and just a short little couple of second clip there that in no way, shape, or form is able to capture what it's like being down there. But certainly that was a bucket list item for me. And I'm going to close it out by saying, you know, oh, I do have one other thing. Why it all works. I added some things in this morning when I heard Ryan wasn't coming. It doesn't matter what your interest is, whether you're somebody that's a wildlife biologist working with Pheasants Forever, or you're ag industry, or you're an energy company, almost somewhere on this matrix that's coming up here, one of these things hits your strike zone, whether it's water quality, corporate sustainability, native bees, honeybees, etc. This oblong circle represents kind of the sphere of interest in that topic, and every one of those things, every one of those topics has a common ground in which they're all touched by pollinators and pollinator habitat. So it really doesn't matter what one of those things is, they all have the opportunity to be touched and influenced by pollinator habitat. So my message that I'm trying to relay to utility companies and to people that are interested in work within our incredibly important right-of-ways is that you have an opportunity to be part of that story and to spread that message so that the public is incredibly engaged. There's far more that brings us together than brings us apart on managing and maintaining rights-of-ways. So, what can you do? I opened this by saying that this is an incredibly important room and that every single person in here can make a difference. And here's my closing story to tell you that you can make a difference and that everybody in here can make a difference. I only literally remember 3 things from the 3rd grade. 1, my 3rd grade teacher took my glue from my desk and put it in the cabinet because she said I played with my glue. I did not eat it, but I rolled it into balls and I probably threw it at people. The second thing that I remember is that her name was Mrs. Abby, and I called her Krabby Abby, probably related to the fact that she took my glue. Didn't like that. The third thing that I remember from the 3rd grade is that Mrs. Abby brought into our classroom a 10-gallon aquarium with monarch caterpillars in it, and for weeks we watched what the caterpillars did. We watched it go into the cocoon, we watched the monarch come out, we all went out into the schoolyard and we released the monarchs. I don't know that that event made me a wildlife biologist, but I can tell you that if there are literally only 3 things that I can remember from the 3rd grade, everybody in this room has the opportunity to have a significant impact on the things that we're talking about related to monarchs and pollinators. And if anybody asks why I took an X-Acto knife and cut 2 people out, I have no idea. I did it when I was however old you are when you're in 3rd grade. Literally, that's the school picture. They were cut out with an X-Acto knife. Remember this map. Everybody in this room today has an influence on the areas in that map that are so incredibly important. Every single person in this room can and will make a difference. So my final thoughts are, we have a moment in time. Moments in time don't come around always. When we have a moment in time, the way we've been doing it in the past, I don't think is going to get it done. We have to be thinking differently, we have to be creative, and we have to make every single acre that we get the best that it can be. That's how important it is. And I just close by saying that about every month, Pheasants Forever releases a new video habitat tip. Many of them are related to pollinators and pollinator habitat, and you can talk to me or you can sign up in the way that it says it on there. So I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. If we have time, I think Pam and Dave can come back up and we can all, just a couple questions. All right, stay sitting down, Pam. I'll take them. No. Anybody? There's one in the back.
I have 2 questions. One is a minor point, and on your list of species for the monarch, I don't believe it includes the Liatris, and that's something that we commonly think of as a very highly desirable species or group of species for the monarch, and I wondered about that. And I also wondered about where you have incorporated native habitat into agriculture if the crop production on the good acreage goes up from the activity of the pollinators.
Yep, so Liatris are obviously a critically important species, not just for monarchs, but others. That's the results of the study that came out of Creighton. If that list was longer than 10, there would be Liatris species on there. almost certainly. Regarding the agricultural production, Pheasants Forever has not been part of any research to document has that increased production within agriculture. We, right or wrong, we focus on putting our energy and our resources into getting the stuff into the ground and getting as much of it as we can, and when we do it, making it as high a quality as we can. In the back.
Peter, I'm curious to see what you charge for your slides. They're beautiful, they're visual, and they really bring across the message that you bring across very well. I think we all have looked at cornfields and saw the edge of the woods and then seeing that slide down and then comparing them with the corns on the cob. It was really well done. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, I'm pretty free at sharing my presentations. I have lots of people that say, can you share that presentation with me? And I usually always say, yes, but it's pretty much useless to you because there's almost no text in it, and I just use them to support what I'm saying. I'll be happy to share this one, but I have talked with Iris that I have to modify that because I did not consult my colleague at USGS before I put his 3 slides in here today, so I have to take those out, but after that I would be happy to share everything else because that is going to be published, so he probably wouldn't fully appreciate me sharing that before it's published. All right, I think I'm out of here, but I will be here the rest of the day. There are many of my colleagues from Pheasants Forever in the room, 6 of them in the room. I know that many of you have already worked with them. They are champions for the things that we talked about today. So if you're from this neck of the woods, make sure that you take the time to build a relationship with those people before you leave today. We're here to work with you on this critically important moment in time. Thank you.